Hey, what's up? How's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing the worst books that I read in the year of 2024. You know, when I'm reading more than 200 books in a year, I'm going to have some flops, some books that I absolutely can't stand. But luckily for myself this year, because I was DNFing so many books this year, I have a lot less 1 and 2 star books than I probably have had in previous years. But somehow I was still able to have a number of 1-star books this year and some very disappointing 2-star reads. And so on this list today, I have 12 books to share with you that are my worst of the books that I read this year. The first 6 that I'm going to tell you about are more like in the 2-star area, and they were mostly just like vastly disappointing, and that's why they made it onto my worst list. And then the top 6 that are on my worst list, like these are the ones that I really didn't like, that I gave 1 star to probably, that I like actively do not recommend for a number of reasons. And I did want to throw out a disclaimer that like, if you enjoy these books, I am so happy for you. I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum. If you are the author of these books, then I'm so sorry. Like, it is not personal and this video is not for you. This video is only meant for other readers, and it's just a way for me to wrap up my reading year. We all have different opinions, and that's something that I think is really great about reading, actually. So maybe some of these books would work for you, but for me, they're my worst of 2024. So without any further ado, let's get into the list. Kicking off the list with number 12, one of my least favorite books that I read this year, that is probably one of the most disappointing books that I've read this year, was Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. You know how much it pains me to have this author on this list? Because I am a Riley Sager stan, okay? And not only was this my book troop book club pick for the month of July, as it usually is, like me and my sister and my mom, we love to do the book troop live shows together every single July, and it's always the new Riley Sager book. And then I also did a full reading vlog of this book on my channel with my friends that was dedicated to reading this book and spoiling this book and talking about it. So I did make a lot of content this year that was like surrounding this book, and I cannot even begin to tell you how disappointing it was to read this book. Because Riley Sager in the past, like he's written books like Survive the Night and The House Across the Lake. Like those are 2 books that I also did not enjoy, but this is the first time I can ever say that a Riley Sager book has like bored me to tears, because at least when I've been critical of him in the past, I've still found that his books are at least entertaining, even if I have some issues with them. But this book was not entertaining. Like this book was so slow and it was so boring, and there were so many moments that were very cringy and just like felt unrealistic. I mean, if you want to see the entire reading vlog where me and my friends read this book and we kind of talk about spoilers, I will have it linked down below, because my friend Gavin even pointed out that there are so many like plot holes, and it was so funny how he was easily able to predict everything that was happening. I expected so much more from this ending personally. Like I feel like this ending was so vanilla. Like we could have had a really juicy, interesting thing going on in the story, and we didn't. It was just so basic. It was so boring. I think this book only made my list because I know what Riley Sager is capable of as an author, and like he's written some of my favorite books of all time. So for him to write something that is just so mediocre and so average, like it really does pain me, because I expect so much more from him. The next book on this list, coming in at number 11, is another book troop pick. I'm so sorry. It's Murder Road by Simone St. James. This is one that I ended up giving 2 stars, and I've got to say it's one of my most disappointing books of the year, because again, Simone St. James is an author that I have enjoyed in the past. I think the reason why this one makes my worst of the year is because this book had so much potential. Like the premise of it was so unique. It was so cool. This book for some reason is getting marketed a lot as like a horror book. Like even in the Goodreads Choice Awards, it was listed in the horror category, which I don't personally agree with at all, because this doesn't read like a horror book. This is definitely like a mystery thriller, and it has some horror elements, like sure, but it's not a horror book, And so that was bothering me. I just had to mention that because this is not a horror book, and if you go into this thinking it's gonna be a horror book, I think it would only disappoint you even more. But the horror elements of this book were so cool and so interesting, and I feel like this author just like wasted a lot of the potential that this book had. I also think that April and Eddie, like the 2 characters that we're following in this book, were pretty obnoxious. Like they were very annoying, very insufferable characters to follow, but like not in a fun way. I think it's just really annoying for me to read a book like this that has so much potential, and like in theory it would check a lot of boxes for me, because like I love a good thriller that has like paranormal vibes and like a paranormal element to it, but so much of this just felt so cheesy. The characters were just so annoying. Like there was no redemption for them. I just couldn't stand them. Another thriller that's going to be making my list, coming in at number 10, is going to be this one called I Need You to Read This. And with this book, it's really unfortunate that this one is making my list, because at the beginning of this book I was having a really fun time with it. I thought the setup for this thriller was really interesting, because I love stories that follow writers, and she was like getting this cool job in New York City. She was going to be like replacing this other woman who was writing this column at the newspaper. Like the setup of it was really fun. I liked the vibes in the office. Like there were some weird things going on, but then literally at the end of this book, there's like, I want to say like 3 to 4 plot twists, and I predicted every single one of them. What the heck? Like I'm not even somebody that typically will like accurately be able to predict plot twists in books. Like it's not even something that I'm like actively thinking about. Like I'm not the kind of person who will like read a thriller book and actively be trying to like solve it as I go, because usually I have a lot more fun with thrillers when I just kind of like shut my brain off and I just like allow myself to be surprised. So I wasn't even trying to actively think about like, ooh, it's gonna happen, but I was like, well, I think this is what's going on. Like, it feels kind of obvious. And then there were 4 like plot twists, if you can even call it that, at the end. And like, I predicted every single thing. And like, that never really happens for me with thrillers, because usually there's one moment where like an author can surprise me at some part. But like with this one, there was nothing surprising about it. And with one of the twists, there was like a little bit more to it than I thought there was gonna be. But honestly, like the way that you have to suspend your disbelief to even think that that's something that could happen was like ridiculous. So I was very upset over the ending of this book. Like, I literally was gonna give this book 4 stars. Like, I was enjoying it up until the ending. Like, the ending was just so predictable. I think after reading this book, it really did make me realize how much weight I put in like being surprised in a thriller book. Like, I read thrillers because I want the ending to surprise me. Like, I need there to be something at the end that's gonna shock me, you know, like that's gonna make me feel like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And I didn't get any of that from this. Another thriller that's making the list, oh my god, I read some really bad thrillers this year, is gonna be Off the Deep End by Lucinda Berry. And this one is on here because I have read one book from Lucinda Berry that I have enjoyed in the past, and it was The Perfect Child. And this one was fairly interesting. Like, this one had a really unique setup. This one had to make my worst of the year because this thriller has an element in the story that really like gives me the ick. Like, there's something so icky happening in this plot that just makes me so uncomfortable. But also like the ending of this book, like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, the ending of this book goes in a direction that I never could have predicted it going that way. And I was like, that is not what I wanted from this book. Like, that is not the direction I thought we were going in, but like not in a good way. I don't know, the ending of this book was crazy. It's like this author had like 20 different ideas for different books and just crammed it all into this one. And I think if you've read this book and you know the ending of this book, you would probably agree that that's a little outlandish. Like, that's a little wild. I feel like with thrillers, it's so hard for me to find the balance, you know, because like I want to be surprised, but I also don't want to be like, wait, what the fuck? Like, this is so outlandish that it's like ridiculous, you know, like it's ridiculous. The way that everything got resolved with the main character, I also really did not like that. I did not like that. If you're wondering like about spoilers for this book, I actually did talk about spoilers in the reading vlog that I made for this book, so I will have that link down below if you want to see more of what I'm talking about, because like I couldn't even resist talking about the spoilers because I was like, you would not believe where this story ends up going. So if you want the spoilers, I will have that vlog link down below. Then next up on my list, we have another, you guessed it, another thriller. And this one is going to be A Talent for Murder by Peter Swanson. And this one, oh my god, it breaks my heart. It literally breaks my heart that I'm putting this book on this list. Like, you have no idea. Because not only is Peter Swanson like one of my favorite thriller authors, but also like this is the 3rd book in the series of The Kind Worth Killing, which, if you didn't know, I am a huge fan of The Kind Worth Killing. Like, to this day, I consider it like one of my favorite thrillers that I've ever read in my life. And then also there was a sequel called The Kind Worth Saving, and that book I also gave 5 stars. I loved the sequel just as much. So for this 3rd book to drop the ball and to fumble this hard, I just can't believe it. I still can't believe it. And you know, maybe I do have the unpopular opinion because a lot of people didn't really like the 2nd book, The Kind Worth Saving, and then some people ended up really liking this one. So like, I don't know, dude. Maybe I just have the unpopular opinion when it comes to this series, but this one for me was such a huge letdown. I think this book also kind of broke my heart because in part 1 of this book, I was very invested and I actually thought I was gonna really like this because, you know, we are following one of the same characters from The Kind Worth Killing, you know, like we're following the character Lily that we know from the previous books. And I was really invested and I thought I would rate this book very high. But then, oh my gosh, part 2 and part 3 of this book, it just becomes so repetitive and so tedious and the characters become so obnoxious to the point where like I was so bored I was gonna scream. Like, I don't know what was going on in this book. It was just so boring. And then I think the final like nail in the coffin for why this had to make my worst of the year list was because of that ending. Like, I'm sorry, what? The ending was just so anticlimactic, and it was also something that like I had predicted would happen from the very first page of this book. Like, am I supposed to be surprised by any of this? Like, I was so confused by how I was supposed to feel at the end of this book because I was not surprised. I actually found it to be very predictable and very obvious what was going on, and the ending was just so beyond frustrating. Like, I thought maybe if anything the ending of the book could save it, you know, and I could rate it higher, but like no, that was not the case. And then book number 7 on my list is once again another thriller, and not just a thriller from my own book club, because it's Someone in the Attic by Andrea Mara. This is definitely one of my most disappointing books of the year for similar reasons, you know, because I feel like this book started off strong. It has a very interesting concept. I love books like this where it's like, oh my god, like, is somebody in their home? You know, because it's like, it's kind of creepy. It's setting up this atmosphere of like, is there somebody literally living in their attic? Like, that is so creepy, so weird. They're getting sent these like videos that look like they're videos that were taken in their own home. This book had everything. It had all of the elements to be great. This book was so incredibly frustrating to read, and I think that's mainly because of the protagonist, like the character that we're following in this book, Julia, I think is her name. Oh my god, like she was so frustrating because it's one of those things where like she's not listening to her children who are very clearly alarmed at like what the fuck might be going on in their own home. She just keeps dismissing them and like dismissing that anything could possibly be going on. Like, wow, people are so good at Photoshop these days. That looks like our house. Like, what? I'm just like, oh my god, she was so frustrating in this book to read because she was so dismissive of like anything going on. There was also like a few plot holes in this book. I don't know, like we discussed this book in great detail, obviously on the BookTube live show, so I'll have that link down below if you want to see us talk about the spoilers of this. But like there were so many moments where we were like, that's a huge plot hole, or like what the freak was the point of all of that? Like the ending of this book, oh my god, it was so frustrating because for me the plot twist at the end was so incredibly obvious. It was just really annoying because then it made a lot of this book feel completely fucking pointless. So like, I don't know man, this book just it's so disappointing because it had so much potential. Okay, now getting into my top 6. So these are like the really disappointing books that I read this year. Coming in at number 6 is going to be The Breakup Tour. This is the first romance book that is making the list, and this one, I'm so disappointed by this book because the premise of this sounded interesting. I mean, it kind of sounded like they were just trying to, you know, write like a Taylor Swift inspired type of story, because this book has always been pitched as like a Taylor Swift concept meets like Daisy Jones and the Six kind of vibes. Like, dude, this book wishes, okay, this book wishes it was nearly as interesting as either of those things. You know, as someone who is a huge Swiftie, I was really excited to read this, you know, because like anything that gets kind of compared to Taylor Swift or kind of like a character that might feel kind of like inspired by her career, that's intriguing to me. Like that sounds like something I'd want to read. But like with this book, oh my gosh, it was almost like they were writing like fan fiction about Taylor Swift in a really weird way, and I feel like these authors completely missed the point for like why Taylor Swift is successful and as famous as she is. Like, it's not just about the music, you know, like it is, but it's not. These characters were so boring and forgettable. Like these characters wish they could be half as interesting as Taylor Swift. And like they had no chemistry either. Like I think that was the biggest thing for me, is that they had zero chemistry. Like it was just painful to read. It just felt like they were trying so hard to appeal to the Taylor Swift fans that it was making me cringe. And like I just couldn't take it. Coming in at number 5, we have Haunt Sweet Home, which this one is a horror novella. And even though this book is only 160 pages long, oh my gosh, this book was my Everest. It felt like it was so much longer. Like it felt like it was just going on forever. Like I was so bored by this. I mean, in this story, we're just following this girl who gets hired by her cousin to work on his like reality TV show where like they're faking some hauntings. Like they're faking a bunch of paranormal things for the show. They're trying to like show that homes are haunted and like all this stuff. But dude, this book is so boring. Like to call this book a horror book, it feels like a stretch because this book does not feel like horror to me at all. And in this story, we're literally just following this protagonist who it's kind of just showing like her day to day of like working on this show for her cousin, and she's kind of like the screw up in her family, so she's trying to like make things right. But like there was nothing interesting in this book that was going on, and I thought the horror elements of this book were so weak that like this just read kind of like contemporary fiction with like maybe a smidge of like something more horror going on, but like, oh my god, it was so incredibly boring. I actually listened to this entire thing on audio and I kept dozing off and like not paying attention so many times that I had to like keep rewinding the audiobook because there was nothing happening in the plot, and the audiobook was only like 5 hours long. It was just so frustrating to read because like there's no reason for a book to be this short and to be this boring. Coming in at number 4, I have The Bell Chime, which, speaking of horror novellas, like this is another horror novella. Oh my gosh, this one just made me so angry when I read it because this is another one. It had so much potential. The beginning of this, oh my god, the beginning was so creepy. It was literally reminding me of like Smile or something, because we're following this character who like at the beginning of this book, she sees a missing poster. Like there's a missing poster outside of her apartment and it's her face on the poster, and she's like, oh, that's weird, like why would there be a missing persons poster with my face on it? And then when she like looks out of the corner of her eye, she can see that the missing persons poster, like her image starts like smiling back at her. Oh my god, it was so creepy. Like the beginning of this book was so good and it was so creepy. It was reminding me actually of like a lot of my favorite different types of horror. But then, oh my gosh, this book hits a point after about 50 pages where like the direction of the story completely shifts, and it's like we get another kind of story like side thing happening, and like holy shit, it was so so boring. And then the second half of this book just got so cheesy. It's like the tone of the book just completely changed, because the beginning was actually really creepy in tone. Like I was getting freaked out, like I was getting goosebumps by how scared I was. And then the second half of this book just completely went off the rails. It became so boring and so cringy and so cheesy. I was like, how is this the same book? Like, how is this all written by the same person? Like, I don't understand what happened. And the ending was such a letdown for me that I was angry. I was so upset by the ending. I was like, how could this, like, how could the author do this to this really cool story? So because I was so angry, I ended up giving this book 1 star, and it's one of my least favorite books that I've read this year, unfortunately. Coming in at number 3, we have one of the very first books that I read this year, and that is Expiration Dates by Rebecca Surley. I mean, gosh, you know it was gonna be like a rough reading year when I nearly started off this year with this book, and it was a 1 star. And this book is one that I was actually really looking forward to, because I've read almost everything that Rebecca Surley has come out with so far. I really liked In 5 Years, and like some of her other stuff I've enjoyed, so I was looking forward to this. And this one, the premise sounded so cool because it's about these expiration dates. Like basically this girl gets like little notes from the universe telling her like how long she's gonna be with each one of the guys that she's with. So like she'll just get a note that says like Matt, and then it'll say like 2 weeks or something, or it'll say like Jeremy, 2 years, or like random shit like that, you know? So like it's interesting because she doesn't know where these notes are coming from or like why the universe does this, but like it's unique, you know? It's kind of cool. It sounded like it was gonna be like a Black Mirror episode or something, like I don't know. But the writing in this book, oh my gosh, dude, the writing was so incredibly cringy and basic. Like I don't even know how to explain to you how cheesy the writing was. It almost read like a very early like Taylor Jenkins Reid story or something like that. Like it was kind of reminding me of like Forever Interrupted or something, where like the writing is just not there. And this main girl, oh my god, this main girl protagonist, like she was so giving like, I'm not like the other girls. And it was constantly describing how like, oh my god, she's so skinny, but like she never exercises because she doesn't like sweat on her forehead, or like she doesn't like to sweat, or like she was very picky about like drinking filtered water. I just found the characters to be so frustrating, and the main character was like so one-dimensional. Like she literally didn't have a personality outside of like being in relationships. I still to this day think about the cheesy line about the pasta. Like there was supposed to be this like deep line when she was out on this date with this guy named Jake, when she said, Jake is a man who is not afraid to ask for what he wants in life, to peer into a bowl of pasta and ask for a bite. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like that's the quality of writing I'm talking about in this book. Like what are you talking about? There was also so much that was going on in the second half of this book that I was so not on board with. There were so many like important character moments and scenes that I feel like should have been fleshed out more, and they were just so half-assed and like glossed over. I don't know, dude, there was nothing about this book that worked for me. It really just pissed me off. Like I did not have a fun time reading this. Like not even mediocre. Like I thought this was bad. Like I thought this was not well written. Okay, coming in at number 2 for this year is gonna be Butcher and Blackbird. And I know, I'm so sorry. This book is very popular. If you're a fan of this book, like very cool. I'm so happy for you. And like I said earlier, you know, I'm not trying to yuck anybody else's yum. Like if you love this book, that's cool, because I read this because I wanted to love it. And this book is a dark romance book, which is outside of my typical, you know, genre. Like I don't typically read romances that would be considered dark romances, so maybe this is just on me. But I thought that this book would be fun, you know, because in this story we're following these 2 serial killers who fall in love with each other. I was like, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. The dark elements of this romance were actually the most interesting part of this book for me. Like I was actually invested in how they were doing their serial killing and like going about that. And like there were some scenes that were written in a very grotesque and disturbing way because they are serial killers, and I thought that those were the strongest elements of this book, because the romance between these 2 was definitely not the strongest part of this book for me. I think the thing that bothers me the most about this book is how it's literally marketing itself as like this dark romance, and yet the book is just so silly and ridiculous, because like both of these characters, dude, they literally read like they're like 13 years old. I don't know why they're talking about girl cooties. And like the book is just so poorly written. Like it was driving me crazy how they would call each other Butcher and Blackbird at like any given time, all the time. It just drives me crazy in romance books when it's like a nickname is supposed to be like a fun, cute, you know, nickname that you use, like you just throw it in like one time and it's like, it's cute. When you start to overdo it, like I'm sorry, but if they're calling each other Butcher and Blackbird like 50 times on the same page, like oh my god, it irks me so bad. Another thing that drove me nuts in this book is how many times Sloane will say to him, you're the worst. Like literally as like her way of flirting with him. Like every response when he says something that's like a little bit like morally gray, she'll be like, you're the worst. And it's like, I'm not even kidding when I count that she said it so many fucking times. Like there was like one chapter where she said it like so many times. It was like the author had no other way of writing flirty banter unless she's saying, you're the worst, or she calls him pretty boy. Oh my god, that gives me the ick. I don't like the pretty boy thing. It's so gross. I genuinely don't understand personally why this book is as popular as it is. Because like even plot wise, like the plot was just not that interesting. Like I expected so much more from like a serial killer story like this. I just thought it would get way more interesting with them both being serial killers. Like I thought they'd be put in danger more and like I thought there would be higher stakes. But this was just like your less than average smutty romance that just didn't go anywhere. Oh my god, so much of this book just really bothered me. It was not for me. That's for sure. It was not for me. Okay, and now we've arrived to my number one worst book that I read in the year of 2024. It's gonna be Midnight on Beacon Street, aka one of my favorite book covers of this entire year. Like I'm obsessed with this book cover. I don't think you understand. I love it. And I was so looking forward to this. Like this was one of my most anticipated books of this year because the premise sounded so fun and the cover just looks so cute. But like literally to call this book a horror book, like you've got to be joking. Like you've got to be kidding me. This is not horror. I think you can't even call this book a thriller, really, because this book is only 190 pages long. There's literally nothing interesting that happens in this book until at least like about 115 pages in is like the first time where like, oh, something kind of suspenseful happens. It's crazy that this book is only 190 pages long and you literally could have cut this book down by like 100 pages. There is no reason for this book to be as long as it is, and it's not even that long. Like it's a short book. It really just felt like it dragged so much because like there's nothing happening in the story. This story is essentially about this girl who's like babysitting these other kids, and like the amount of time that is spent in this book with her just like playing games with these kids, talking about her teenage friends, doing shit that doesn't matter and contributes absolutely nothing to the story. It's just insane to me. Like it was so boring. There was also so many flashback scenes thrown in between the chapters that were also very repetitive, very boring, added nothing to the story. I thought because there were so many flashbacks and there was like a different timelines happening, it made it extra confusing for like no reason. I think this was so disappointing though because the premise of this book literally promises suspense and tension on every page. Like whoever wrote the description of this, like did you actually read the book? Because even the thrills in this book that happened later on were so cheesy and so underwhelming and so freaking ridiculous. Like you've got to be kidding me. Because like the villain of this book, like give me a fucking break. That is so cheesy and I saw that coming from a million miles away. Like there was nothing surprising happening in this book. Also a scene that happens in the second half of this book that I thought was so unrealistic with the way that it was handled, because it was like something very traumatic just had happened to them, you know, and she's like a young girl babysitting these other kids, and then after that traumatic incident happens, they're just like, okay, let's just carry on with our night. And I'm like, what? Like no way. Like there's just no way. I honestly don't know if this book is written to be kind of like satire or to be like taken not seriously, because I don't get it. Like I don't understand the tone of this book. I don't know if I was supposed to be taking it as seriously as I was, but it didn't read like it was like campy either. Like the tone was just confusing and all over the place, and I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this, but it just made me angry. And I mean, the fact that this book has an average right now of 2.86 out of 5 on Goodreads, I feel like that tells me everything that I need to know, that like nobody knows how to feel about this book, because it was not good. It was just not good. And it was not well written, and the characters were so one-dimensional and so cliche, and everything about this book was a huge letdown. Like there was nothing about this book that was interesting. Wow, sorry to get so heated there at the end, but clearly I was very passionate about not liking that book. I do apologize to anybody who, you know, enjoyed these books, because, you know, once again, I wanted to enjoy them. I only read books that I think I'm gonna like for the most part, and so you'll have to let me know, do you share any opinions with me on these books? Like, are these also some of your worst books that you've read this year? Or let me know your thoughts. Like, what are your worst books that you read this year? If you want to sound off in the comments with like your top 3 or your top 5 worst books of the year, please feel free to do that, because I love seeing everybody's different opinions on the books that they're reading this year. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Very soon you can expect my best books of the year video coming after this one. My best books of the year video is always like one of my favorite videos to make every single year. I really look forward to it, so I hope that you're looking forward to it as well. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!